Just 5 days into the job, Sir Keir Starmer has touched down in Washington for the NATO Leaders Summit in his first major international event since taking office last week. Already, however, the Prime Minister is facing a backlash. He's insisting the UK has a cast-iron commitment to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence, but refusing to lay out a timetable for when the government will actually cough up the cash. He won't even say that it'll happen this Parliament. Well, according to the Prime Minister, a strategic review needs to come before all of that. Well, joining me now with the very latest, live from Washington, D.C, is our very own political editor, Christopher Hope. And Christopher, you've been following the Prime Minister today. You've been at the White House today. What on earth is going on? Because it seems like there's a very confusing pledge from Keir Starmer here.
Hi Tom, welcome to Washington DC, where it is about 30 degrees here and it's hot, a lot hotter I think than back in the UK. That's right, so Keir Starmer has come here. This time last week he was staying in a B&B somewhere in the Midlands I think tonight, and instead he finds himself being hosted by Joe and Jill Biden for a glitzy White House dinner tonight here in Washington. That's right, so far Sir Keir Starmer has met with Joe Biden. They met on their first handshake was in full view of the cameras at the NATO summit just now. Earlier we saw him meet with Olaf Scholz, who's the German Chancellor. The pair are quite good friends. He met, quite interestingly, with Nick Thomas-Symonds, who is the Minister for European Relations, and that's quite interesting because, of course, next week there's a big summit at Blenheim Palace in the UK, when 44 European leaders will be meeting there, hosted by Sir Keir Starmer, and they'll be discussing how the UK will look in a post-Brexit world as Sir Keir Starmer tries to reset that Brexit relationship. But the idea of the personal meetings, we've seen, of course, also Emmanuel Macron give a kind of bro handshake to Sir Keir Starmer. Sir Keir Starmer gave Joe Biden an Arsenal shirt with the number 46 on the back to represent the 46th President of the United States. So lots of friendship here, and of course Sir Keir Starmer is the bright shiny thing amongst world leaders right now. He's a leader who was elected last week on this landslide majority, so he's the one everyone wants to speak to. We're hoping to be later on tonight with the Prime Minister, maybe even in the Oval Office, as he meets with Joe Biden for a fireside chat, and we'll bring more of that to you first thing in the morning. But it hasn't all gone away from the worries here about law and order, about justice, about the overcrowded prisons haven't gone away from Sir Keir Starmer. But this kind of thing on the world stage, glad-handing with world leaders, is exactly why so many people want to be Prime Minister, to show they can back for Britain internationally.
Goodness me, it'll be fascinating to see what happens inside the Oval Office with the two of them a little bit later on. Of course, an Oval Office that no longer has a bust of Winston Churchill in it. It was there, of course, for George W. Bush. It was taken out by Obama, put back by Trump, taken out again by Biden. It seems to be doing a bit of a Churchill bust hokey-cokey. But Christopher, you do mention something very interesting, which is that, of course, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, will be in office for at least 5 years with an enormous majority. Joe Biden might not be the president in a few months' time. Emmanuel Macron is term limited to 2027. Olaf Scholz is 20 points behind in the polls in Germany. Justin Trudeau is 20 points behind in the polls in Canada. One recent poll had him coming in third place from first place. Clearly, in terms of the person with the most staying power at this international conference, it could well be the British Prime Minister.
That's right. Well, Sir Keir Starmer, he's not even a week into his time as Prime Minister with that landslide majority. He's the one they all want to speak to. Everyone likes a winner, Tom, and particularly on the world stage. So people are going towards him and talking to him. And the handshake and almost the half embrace which Emmanuel Macron gave to Sir Keir Starmer was very, very warm. He certainly sees Starmer, I would imagine, the French president, as an antidote to this rise of populism that he is seeing in his own country, of course, with the National Rally doing so well in those elections, and also wider on continental Europe. But yeah, no question, I think this is a moment for Sir Keir Starmer. He's being very businesslike about it and making clear that he's trying to put Britain first. He was challenged overnight on the flight here by reporters, and I was one of them. What's more important, paying doctors properly, sorting out the welfare state, or keeping Britain safe? And he came down, or hinted very strongly, he backed the latter. I think the idea of keeping this country, our country, safe from threats is so important, and that's why he's being pressured all the time about getting towards 2.5% of GDP spent on defence. That's money that would go towards Ukraine and their war with Russia. And he met with President Zelensky earlier, and I was in the room for that. So it was a very warm meeting between David Lammy, John Healey, the Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary, with Sir Keir Starmer, meeting with Zelensky. But there's no deadline on when they'll get to 2.5% of GDP on defence. We heard from the Tories it would be the end of the decade. We haven't got that from Labour, and that pressure will go on and on. But next week, this big strategic defence review starts, and that's the point at which Labour's got to start to deliver on its promise to keep us safe.
Really interesting stuff there. Well, Christopher, I hope you're having a much warmer time in Washington, D.C. than we've all been having back here in Blighty.